And I think right now, kind of what I wanted to talk to you all about and kind of get vulnerable with you all about is mental health. Is mental health my mental health journey, my mental health battle, and where I was, where I'm at, and what ultimately was the biggest difference maker in that battle, and that's my personal relationship with Christ. So I just kind of wanted to set the tone, or just let you guys know that's why I'm focusing the topic on that. And I think just to preface it beforehand, before I go into kind of a little bit of what I'll talk to you about, I do want it to be known that I have gone through significant mental health therapy. I went through 3 iterations of cognitive processing therapy, CPT, at the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center, their PTSD clinic with a psychologist. And the reason I preface that is I think it's important for us to go get the professional help that we need oftentimes. And I've heard others, before, well, I'm just going to take it to God. I'm going to take it to Jesus. And not that he can't heal us, not that he can't do miracles in our lives, but I think there's events that happen, especially in combat or any traumatic event. God created everything, and we believe that God created everything, including ourselves. And he also created other people who are gifted in the areas of mental health wellness and professional mental health counseling that I think oftentimes we can maybe overlook or overgloss, thinking that we'll just turn to God and heal us. And so that's why I say this. And I also say this because I'm able to talk about what I talk about today because of what I endured and what I went through in the mental health and in the cognitive processing therapy. So just kind of a tidbit on that end. So I'm going to share with you all a story of mine, a one of the traumatic events that took place in combat for me and my guys. And I'll just kind of go into it, and we can talk about what the Lord has done with it, what he did with it then, and what he's doing with it now. So to set the scene, this was basically almost, it was March or April timeframe of 2004. And I was leading a infantry platoon in the 10th Mountain Division, and we were deployed. 8 of those 12 months for a year deployment was in Fallujah. But during this period of time, for about 2 months, we were just a little bit south of Fallujah in a town called Iskandariyah, Iraq. And there was a main route in Iskandariyah, a main road that was just constantly being hit by IEDs, almost every single day, and blowing up coalition convoys on their resupply routes. So my infantry platoon, I only took half the platoon out that night, so there's only 2 squads going out, and we were going to conduct counter IED ambushes along this route in order to prevent, the bad guys from placing IEDs on the road. We were going to set up little small ambushes in a farm field on the east side of the road, overwatching this road. So we took about 4 vehicles out, and we did a convoy to this farm field, and we circled kind of the wagons or the Humvees up in the farm field as our kind of our patrol base, and then we dismounted, and I was leading about two squads to their counter IED ambush locations. And this is probably about midnight, because we're going to overwatch it from about midnight to 4 in the morning was the mission, was the time frame. So I was going to go with we broke the teams up into actual fire teams, so about 5 guys each, so we could have multiple ambushes covering like almost 1.5 kilometers of territory, because that was kind of the main section of the road that was getting hit by all these IEDs. And I was going to go, or I did go, with my lead fire team, my most northern fire team, because they were going to be the furthest away from everybody else. I wanted to have kind of command and control over that element. So my RTO and myself joined that fire team of 5 individuals to walk to the most furthest location north. And there was 7 of us total. So as we're walking through this farm field in the middle of the night, and we're under nods and night optical division devices, um, and we're walking through, and we're going through almost like a wheat field is the type of farm field, and we're kind of going uphill a little bit, not a huge escalation, not a huge incline, but a little bit uphill. Was where we were walking through this farm field, and lo and behold, out of nowhere we came under AK-47 fire. And it was a near ambush. So it was with it was with hand grenade range. So it's within 35 meters that we started receiving the AK-47 fire. And luckily, looking back on it now, the fire position of the individual shooting at us, because they were more elevated than us, they were just shooting right over the top of us, just a few feet over our heads. But because of that incline, luckily we weren't, no one was getting, no one was getting hit yet in my fire team. But immediately my RTO and I, we bound to the right, and we kind of get on line with the fire team, and we lay down suppressive fire. And then we just begin the 3 to 5 second, battle drill 6 alpha, 6A, react to contact. And we start moving up the hill, 3 to 5 second rushes, getting up there and laying down heavy suppressive fire. And finally the fire stops. We stop getting, shot at by AK-47 fire. And I remember during that firefight, immediately once it went off, I remember just like being super excited and like super fired up, like, heck yeah, we're gonna kill these bad guys. Because in my head I was thinking that it was, insurgents that were placing the IEDs, that we were, engaging with, and that we were, right place, right time, we had snuck up on them. And until I called out ceasefire, and until that, the AK-47 fire stopped. And as soon as it stopped, I'll never forget. It was the most blood curdling scream, I've ever heard. And and it just, at that point, it scared me. It scared me because I'm like, man, what is this? No, like, this is not the scream I thought I would be hearing. I was like, this is not what I thought, because this does not sound like an enemy insurgent. So we get up to the top of the hill, and it's roughly a 12 to 13-year-old boy. He's the one that was screaming, and we had shot him all up. He was shot in the shoulder, he was shot in the arm, he was shot in the hand, he was shot in the leg, he was shot in the foot. So he was the one that was, on the ground screaming, just an awful scream because of the pain he was in. Well, we immediately get up there and we immediately start patching him up, because, the AK-47 had fallen away from him. He wasn't shooting at us anymore. So we immediately start triaging him and patching him up. And then right where he had started shooting at us, there was a little makeshift tent. It was to his left, to our right, when we were in the firefight, right next to him. It was just like a stake in the ground with a white sheet around it. And one of my guys came out of the tent, because he had gone in to search the tent, and he came out immediately, and he was white as a ghost. And he was like, "Sir, don't go in there." I said, "What are you talking about?" So I went in the tent, and when I went in the tent, the boy's mother was inside the tent, and she was on her hands and knees, and she was holding her 3-year-old little girl, who was lifeless. And she had beautiful, beautiful, curly, dark hair, the little girl. And she was wrapped in a pink blanket, and her mother was just holding her. And I immediately saw it, and the mom looked back. She just looked at me. She was in shock. She was in just a state of shock, right? And I came back, and I've said this before, I came out of that tent a changed man forever. And I walked back out of the tent, and in that moment, I just turned it off. I completely flipped a switch, and completely went into, ranger mode. Called my medic over, said, "Hey, doc, triage her." I mean, I knew she had expired. I knew she was, gone, but I was going to make every effort to try to save her. So he starts triaging her. He brings her out. I call in Kazovac. I'm like, I don't care. I'm calling in a bird. We're going to get her on the bird. We're going to get her back to the fob. We're going to make every effort we can. My company commander, he was out on the mission that night and he came over and he's, because he was going with one of our most southern fire teams. And he goes over there or he comes up to us and he starts kind of, he starts kind of getting very fired up, very irritated, like, how could this happen? What the F over? And him and I got into it real quick. I kind of got into it with him. I said, hey, like, back the, you know, not good, not good Christian talk, but real talk, authentic talk. Like, hey, back the F off. Like, we just got in a fight. Like, this happened. This is called war. This just happened. And he received it. He recognized it. He starts helping out as well. And I'll never forget. So we get the girl out, we get her mom, and actually her dad was in a farmhouse adjacent like to this field. And we went and got him. He came out and we put him, well, we put the whole family, the mom, dad, and the boy and the girl on the Kazovac on the Medbird and flew them out. And then we had about a 45-minute convoy back to our compound that night. And I'll never forget my RTO, uh, who was 19 years old. And I was 23 at the time, but my RTO, I was sitting shotgun on the Humvee and he was directly behind me. And this is old school. We had no doors on the Humvees. I mean, it's all open. You sit on the side, it was just, cowboys at that time frame. But he's talking to me the whole way back and he's like, sir, he's like, how could that happen? He's like, sir, why did that happen? And he's just asking me. And finally I go, dude, I don't have an answer for you. Sometimes bad shit just happens. And I look back at it now, right? And one, kind of why I preface the first part of the conversation is everything I just shared and the emotions that I'm able to even express now. I've had more times, when I first was going through this, the emotions were very strong. I mean, where I would just be sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, finally getting this out and telling this story. And the way I had to do it was I had to write it out. Part of cognitive processing therapy is sitting in it and writing it out and writing the totality of it out. Because for so long, what I had done is I had shut it off. I had become the man who came out of that tent and didn't let what happened inside that tent try to ever affect me. I would justify it by saying, I didn't know that little girl. That's just war. That's just combat. Bad stuff happens. And I never allowed for myself to go through the grieving process, to feel that, to know that's a life. That's a life that God created. That's a life that Christ created. And it's okay to be sad. It's okay for it to emotionally hurt, even now, even still. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to share the story, is because mental health is important. And we got to be able to share these stories and we got to be willing to do the work. And that work means sitting in it. It means not running from it. It means not justifying it by telling ourselves falsehoods about ourselves, telling ourselves falsehoods about others, or just completely kind of what my hallmark was, which was avoiding it at all costs. I would just bury it, or what I perceived as burying it, and what I thought I could just ignore it and just never talk about it. And that was war, and that was then, and now I'm new, and that doesn't affect me. And it just doesn't happen that way. Our bodies, our brains, the way we process information, physiologically, psychologically, it just doesn't happen that way. And so I'm a big proponent in advocating for mental health and going through it and allowing for the darkness of the events that have taken place in us. It doesn't have to be combat. It doesn't have to be an event like mine. It can be any type of event that's, traumatic to us, or even just a high impact event in our life, whether that's childhood, whether that's adulthood, whenever it is. There's an acronym in Ranger School and in infantry. It's called SILS, and it stands for stop, see, look, listen, smell. And what you do is when you're when you're walking through the woods, oftentimes during a patrol, you need to conduct SILs. Stop, see what's around you, really look even further than your immediate, seeing. Look deep into the woods, listen to hear what's going on, and then smell. And I say that, that's a military acronym, but I wasn't performing SILs on myself. I didn't take the time to tactically do that pause and to perform that. I just continued mission. Okay, well, get out of the army. I'm going to find something else that I want to, really do. And then, join the FBI and got back into national security matters. And then when that wasn't fulfilling the void that I was looking for, well, okay, let me pursue launching my own security consulting company, and went in to pursue that. And I will say it's only in a way in which God can do it, but in 2017, he got my attention. I didn't come to him. It was actually more, he got my attention so grand, so in such a way that only he can do, that it got me to the VA, and it got me to evaluate my mental health, and um, it got me to evaluate that, okay, maybe I do have PTSD. Because at that point in time, up until that point, there was one instance in 2013 that I did reach out to the VA, to see if maybe there were some issues I was having. Because my biggest thing is I could avoid all the things of the past, and then I was emotionally detached. I could just emotionally cut off, especially from my family, from, my wife and kids. I could easily, no emotions ever affected me. And that's part of what happens in combat. It's part of, our survival makeup is, fight, flight, freeze. And we get in that mentality. And in traumatic events where our lives really are perceived as, in jeopardy, or the life of another is in jeopardy, well, yeah, of course we go into that fight, flight, freeze. Emotion goes off, and we go into, those survival instincts. But that doesn't happen. That doesn't serve well in other areas of our lives, when we're trying to have those intimate connections with our wives, or spouses, or significant others, or when we're trying to have that connection, that emotional connection with our children. Because for so often I was like, you know, take a knee, face out, drink water, suck it up, drive on, that mentality. And that doesn't work. That doesn't work with a 3-year-old boy. That doesn't work with a 5-year-old daughter. I mean, I wasn't so extreme that it was, that they were in jeopardy or unsafe or anything like that, but it still wasn't from a loving, nurturing place until 2017, until that, proverbial IED went off in my life to get me that help. And me really sitting in all of this, and grieving all of that, um, did, healing really start. And that's where, I gotta tell you, it wasn't until I allowed for Jesus to come into every part of me, every absolute part of me, because I was great at giving Jesus 90% of my life. I was great at giving him 95% of my life. I was great at giving him 99.5% of my life. But, um, he wants all of us. He wants our good, our bad, and our ugly. And I think until we're willing to give him our good, our bad, and all of our ugly, at least my experience has been, until I was willing to give him all of that, was he going to line up everything that needed to be lined up. The psychologist that I had at the VA, that was the top of her game, top of her field, and just the ability of what she was able to do with me in there. And for this audience too, we're, most everyone on here, it's a Christian lunch. Wherever you're at in your journey with Christ, there was a little bit of a hesitance of me of going to the VA, because I was going to church at that time, and I was a believer in Christ at that time in 2017. I was very, concerned, or there was a little bit of residence in me, resistance in me, like, oh, well, the VA, it's going to be, there's not going to be any, any spiritual or Christian aspect of that. And that's how God works. That was a fear of mine. And I prayed about it before I went in. And at the VA clinic there, you had to go to these 4 PTSD orientations before you started, well, during the whole process of kind of starting on that plan. And the first PTSD orientation I went to, they kind of giving you the rundown of all the different, options and everything else. And they're like, oh, we just started a new group here at this VA. It's called the Healing Combat Trauma Group. And it's actually Christian based, biblical led, and it's by the chaplain and by a psychologist in its group. And I'm like, all right, God, like, there you are. Like, there's your sign. Like, you know what? You show up abundantly more than I could ever ask. And that group, I will tell you, that Healing Combat Trauma group, that was the first time I really saw what Jesus meant by the church, what Jesus meant by, and it was made up of like probably 12 to 15 of us, mostly Vietnam veterans, and then the chaplain and the psychologist. And it's through Crew Military is the book. It's called the Combat Healing Manual, which, Merrick, I can get to you after this, because it might be a good resource for this group. But that group and going through that manual together, part of the homework in that, especially on this trauma I just shared about with that little girl, which, I had written it all out and gone through the cognitive processing therapy of writing that all out. But then in the Healing Combat Trauma group, there's a point in time where you take a traumatic event and then you look at it, and the question is, where do you see Jesus in this event? Where do you see Jesus in this specific traumatic event that took place? And it was a different perspective. I had not had that perspective in the cognitive processing therapy. So one Saturday morning, I went to write it out, and it took probably about 2.5 hours to write. And I'm a hot mess, but I'll never forget. I mean, I never forget where I was. I was on the back patio of our house in Florida, and just overcome with, sadness, but at the same time, peace, because where I saw Christ in that, when I sat on that, is I saw Christ holding that little girl in his hands, in his arms. And I saw him like hovering above us by like 30 to 35 feet in the middle of that night, just holding us. And he was weeping too. He was crying when I was just sitting on this. And he was crying for all of us. He was crying for every single person that experienced that night, because it was not that little boy's intention to shoot on us. He thought we were robbers coming up on him and his sister and mom in the middle of a farm field. He didn't know that we were coalition forces. We didn't know that was a little boy shooting at us with an AK-47. We thought it was bad guys that were trying to place IEDs in the road. And so, the power in acknowledging that, it was no one's intention that night for that to take place, really released a burden, I think, on me, because for so long I had, and it was specifically because I was so excited during the initial contact. And that's the adrenaline rush and the, all the chemical release in the brain. But I remember just having this overwhelming feeling of guilt because of the excitement in that, in that firefight. And then once I realized that, it was not my intention, it was none of my guys' intention, it was, the most horrific outcome that could ever happen, the loss of an innocent life. um and part of it too is, we have to ask the why, right? We have to ask the why. Yeah, that's part of that, process. And what I came to found is, Often all of us, most of us, will never get that answer. We'll never get the why answered until we're united with Christ in heaven, right? We won't get the why, but if we can get to the how it can be used for good, if we could get to the how can we use this pain and this hurt and this tragedy for good, and the way I've come to kind of do that is this, by sharing it, by sharing her story, sharing our stories, sharing Jesus' story, the love of him, the love of what he's able to do when he's able to pierce our hearts, and we allow for him to pierce our hearts all the way to our core, to get rid of the mar and the muck and the blood of, a lot of times our own self-inflicted stuff through sin, and sometimes through the stuff of others. I think the heart is pure when we're born, right? But it's all the stuff that's added to it through our life experiences, whether from ourselves or from others, that gets mucked and marred. And that's why we need the piercing of Jesus, the piercing of our heart again, to be renewed in him, to recognize, what he's able to do to our hearts when we're willing to give him all of us. So that's what I wanted to do. I also want to know, hey, yeah, I shed tears. I shed tears today. And I will tell you, I was never able to cry. The only two times I cried after the military, after, or like as an adult, the only two times were the the birth of my daughter and the birth of my son. And both of those times they felt foreign to me. They almost felt like an out of body, like I was behind myself as I was there, crying, holding them right after they were born. And that was the only two times I had really cried until this happened in 2017, until I went through all the therapy and did the work. Um, and did that. So I want you to know, like, I don't have shame. I don't have insecurities about, because the way I look at it is like, God gave me that. He gave me the ability to cry again. He gave me the ability to feel again. And in feeling sadness, he also gave me the ability, because this is a sad story, he gave me the ability to feel joy, to feel happiness, to feel contentment, to feel love in a way that I've never been able to feel before. So while I'm able to express sadness and tears do come, I want you to know I don't, I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm not ashamed by it. It's a natural process that he's given to all of us. I think oftentimes we've got to flip the script on, especially on the male combat veteran. We got to flip the script on what masculinity means, what masculinity looks like. And I look to King David often in that. I mean, you go to Psalms, and I mean, there's so many times, because I love his heart, because he pours it out to God. And I mean, he gives him his good, his bad, his ugly. And I love that, because that's a form of worship. And so I guess I share that because, sometimes after these people are like, oh, sorry that, and like, don't feel sorry. This is, I consider this joy. I consider this something that he's actually gifted back to me. So also, one other thing, and I know this is a ramble, Merrick. I know this is a ramble, so forgive me on that. But one other point that I'd be reminiscent if I didn't share is, in that 2017 timeframe, I did have suicidal thoughts. I did have, and that was finally what got me to the VA. And I had some in kind of like early middle school years. I had some fleeting thoughts every once in a while. But then when these came on in 2017, and it's what got me to the VA. It's finally what was like, okay, like, and I hadn't had those in so long, and it terrified me. And it got me to the place where I was like, okay, I've got to get to the VA. And I went on a Monday morning and said, hey, I'm not leaving here until you see me. And to their credit, they saw me that day. They did the initial evaluation, and then they did a follow-up the next day. And then the next week I was in at the VA at the PTSD clinic. But I share that because we got to talk about that. You're not alone. If there's anybody else out there that's, had them or having them, But where they can grab a power on us, just like the story what I shared, where there's power to the enemy is when we let them stay in darkness, when we let them stay inside and we don't bring them to the light, when we don't bring them to the light of audibly declaring them, and when we don't bring them to the light of Jesus, and when we don't bring them to the light of others. So I share that because I want that to be known, because I don't want that to go unspoken. And for others, wherever we're at, we got to recognize that we got to do something. We got to do something because we're still losing that battle of too many a day taking their life. So we got to talk about it. We got to make it known that it's prevalent and it happens, and that's not a defining, that does not define you as a person, as an individual, if those thoughts has occurred in your own life. So with that, Merrick, I'm kind of, I think we're close to the time frame to hit it up on questions and answers and everything else in between. But I appreciate the invite, and I appreciate you guys letting me, share his story and how he's moved in my life.